This idea of using your mindset when you're trying to fall pregnant is one we hear a lot. But what does it actually mean? And does it really make a difference to success rates? Well, today's guest has a lot of evidence to say that it does. And if you're finding that nothing seems to be working for you as you're trying to conceive, then this is an episode you need to hear. That's all coming up on today's episode of Your Journey to Fertility. Welcome to Your Journey to Fertility. This is the podcast that blends both science with spirit to give you all the tools you need as you navigate your fertility journey. I'm your host, Jennifer Edmonds, and for the last 15 years, I've been helping women on their journeys to motherhood and beyond. I believe that combining the latest scientific research along with the best energetic and mindset practices will help you to avoid putting your life on hold and bring you closer to your baby. Here each week, you'll learn ways to support your fertility and trust your body so you can stop stressing that you'll never have a baby and finally walk your path to motherhood. This is the Your Journey to Fertility podcast. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. I am so happy that you are here. We have an awesome conversation coming up today. I am speaking to the wonderful Kathryn Bregman from Badass Fertility, and we are chatting about how being in the right state of mind is the foundation for getting and staying pregnant. And mindset is one of those things that feels quite abstract. And I remember when I was deep in my own struggle of trying to conceive, it just felt like something I had no idea how to get to or, no idea how to change. So in this episode, Kathryn really goes through the simple and practical things that you can do to actually make a difference. Kathryn is a fertility and a mindset coach, and she had a really long and difficult fertility journey of her own. She had miscarriage, unsuccessful IVF cycles, a whole bunch of diagnoses that basically told her that she wasn't going to be able to fall pregnant. But she eventually found that a few simple mindset shifts made all the difference in her life, and she ended up conceiving her little girl naturally at the age of 40. So if you feel like all the medical advice, the perfect diet, taking all the best supplements just doesn't seem to be helping you on this journey, then this is a conversation you need to listen to. So let's get started. Here's Kathryn. Kathryn, welcome to the podcast. I am so thrilled to have you here with us today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It is such an honor and pleasure to be here today.
Can we start by learning a little bit more about you and the work that you do?
Absolutely. Yes. So I work with women who have encountered obstacles on their journey to their babies. I focus specifically on emotional wellness. And what that really means to me is, I became inspired to do this from my own fertility journey, which I'll talk about a little bit, I'm sure, in bits and pieces here. And what I found, when I was struggling to have my daughter for several years, was that there was so much information out there. There were so many different options. There were so many different directions I could move in, whether it was the classic, take the assisted reproduction route or take, alternative routes, but there was just so much there and it was overwhelming. And I was didn't know what to do. And so really, I came to work in fertility mindset and coaching in order to support women who are experiencing what I call conception chaos, which is really where, you go into this fight or flight mode and you start to experience stress in your body, as your hormones get thrown off. It leads to hormonal imbalance. Your prefrontal cortex shrinks. So rational decision-making becomes more difficult. And you find yourself just, throwing spaghetti at the wall, hoping that something will stick. And also simultaneously filled with shame and saying all of these negative things to yourself, like I'm too old, I waited too long, my husband or partner would be better off with a more fertile woman. I mean, these are things I said to myself, and they're things that I know the women I work with who are in the Badass Fertility program, which is the main, coaching model that I use. I know that we all say it, we all do it. And so really my mission is to help women get back in alignment by learning mind-body techniques, cognitive behavioral tools, and forming relationships with each other.
I think that
So
is
that might be a long-winded response.
no,
But
it's such an important it's such an important thing that you said this idea of conception chaos, which just explains it so well because it is chaos. And you don't know what you don't know when you're on this journey, right? And, you've got doctors telling you one thing, and then you've got holistic practitioners like naturopaths telling you something else, and, Chinese medicine doctors throwing that into the mix. And like, it's really overwhelming. And I don't think there's nothing wrong with all of those things. I think we should employ bits and pieces from all of them. But, when we could probably find this with so many of your clients, when you try to do everything perfectly all at once, all the time, that's where things really it's a cocktail for disaster, isn't it? So,
exactly.
So you found that being able to work with your mindset and to overcome a lot of the challenges that you were having on your own journey made a big difference. Can you talk a little bit about your journey to having your daughter and what that looked like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give like the Cliff Notes version.
How long we got? Yeah.
I know, right? Exactly. Is this like a double podcast? No. So no, I got married at 36. And at that point in time, I already was, before we even started trying to get pregnant, I had this idea in my mind that I was late, right? That I was late to the game and I was worried about it. In hindsight, I look back at that and I'm like, 36, that is nothing. Like 36, like you are totally young. Don't even worry about it. But at the time, you're fed this sort of narrative of like 35 is this intense age, And so my husband and I started trying to conceive right away. The first time we used an ovulation kit, I got pregnant. And famous last words, I remember saying, why do people struggle to get pregnant? Just use an ovulation kit. Like I literally said that. Famous last words, because a few weeks later, we lost that pregnancy. And I didn't get pregnant again for 3 years. And it didn't matter how many ovulation kits I used because I was using, like multiple ones at the same time, doing everything I possibly could to conceive. And it started with, okay, I was already into acupuncture. So I was like, well, let me go do acupuncture. And then that led to some doing like herbs. So I was doing the Chinese medicine route, which I think benefited me, but I definitely had other blocks going on in my mind that really needed to be worked out. Because one of the things, I find so fascinating about fertility, and I know you know this too, is it's such a mind body thing. Like it's not like a broken arm where you go to the doctor and there's one or two or three choices on how to fix a broken arm. And the answer to your broken arm is obvious and you do it. It's like this huge interconnected web of the mind and the body and even the spirit, if you want to go there, that all need to come together. So what I found was that I'm doing acupuncture, I'm doing herbs, trying for about a year. At this point, I'm about 37. And my acupuncturist was like, I think you should go get a workup. I think you should go to an IVF clinic. And I know that she was well intended, but in hindsight, again, I'm like, there are so many other things I could have been doing before being directed there. Right. But anyway, fine. So I'm a huge fan of IVF too. So I don't want to like sound like I'm knocking that because I'm really not. I just really value like a broad, holistic perspective on this. So I go to get my workup. I've got like a bazillion issues and, ranging from like elevated NK cells, which is when you have the like more white blood cells than you should. And they can often potentially like attack a fetus, even if it was to implant. So I had that. I had, they thought I had endometriosis. We didn't do a laparoscopy because that was, my doctor was like, there's no point. You've got 7 out of 10 indicators for endo. So we're just going to assume you have endo. They said I had low ovarian reserve, like my AMH was, I can't remember if it's high or low, but it wasn't good. And, a bunch of other things. It was basically devastating. Like I left that workup feeling like I was a total failure and becoming a mom was probably going, never going to happen for me, or it was going to be this uphill battle. And I had to do IVF right away. And my husband was very optimistic. Like we balanced each other really well. He was like, it's going to happen. I know it's going to happen. I don't even think we need to do this, but if you want to do it, we'll do it. So I was like, oh, we're doing it. Like we are definitely doing this, So we started the process for IVF. And we did 2 egg retrievals over the course of about, say, 3 or 4 months. Both of them yielded about 3 embryos, and we genetically tested because we were advised to, based on my age, and which at that point I was, I think, 38, and none of the embryos came back genetically normal. So that was absolutely devastating. And at that point, I was like, just couldn't take that path anymore. And I had actually started working with a therapist and working with a coach. And the coach that I was working with was really helping me to redefine my sense of time and encouraging me to stop feeling so urgent, like to question, not to stop, but to question, like, really, what does it matter? Like if you take off 4 months, and really just get your body and your mind aligned. Like, and I just started thinking, something's not right here. Something just didn't feel right. Something was off. And I stepped back because I was really starting to learn how to follow my instincts. I was starting to learn how to listen to my intuition and how to trust the timing and trust my body, which were all things that going into this process, I was terrified to do because I was like, no, I just want a baby. Like, let's just let the doctors handle it. They're going to fix it. It's all going to be fine. And then in reality, that wasn't how things were playing out. So as I started to become more self-aware and more empowered to listen to, myself, my instincts, what I thought was right, and follow it, I started finding all of these new ways of improving my fertility that worked for me. Like I always say, like there's no one path for anyone, right? But you have to find what works for you. And that's why listening to your instinct is so important. So long story short, I changed my diet. I changed my exercise routine. And one of the things that's so like magical about that for me, I would say, because when I know if I was listening to this podcast like 7 years ago, I would be like, oh my God, well, so much easier said than done, like, because I considered myself healthy. I was an exerciser, but I wasn't doing the things that were actually optimizing my fertility. And that's like a whole other show. But just to say, like, by working on my mindset, I could do it in a way that felt empowering, not like a punishment. So it was really all about like how I changed my perception of my situation. And that led me to be willing to try new things. And within 4 months, I got pregnant naturally and had my daughter right before my 40th birthday. And there's more to the story than that, but I'm just going to like leave it there. I think we get the picture.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing. What a journey. And I think so many people can probably relate to so much of what you said there. But I'd like to go into this idea of mindset and this mind-body connection a little more deeply. So you said something really, it was a great analogy there. Like if you break your arm, you go to the doctor, it's like, cool, here's a cast. Right. Like, don't use the arm, etc. Arm fixed. But that's just not how fertility works because it's so nuanced. And you're right, it isn't about the body. It isn't only about the body. There is this connection about, the way we view ourselves and our worthiness, and it is so interconnected. So can you talk a little bit about what you think the mind-body connection, or why you think the mind-body connection is so important when you're trying to conceive? And how do we start to balance it or get in tune with it?
Such a good question.
There, Karen. Sorry, it's a lot of questions.
I love it. I love it. I'm like, okay, so there's so many levels to answer this question on. Like, where do we go? I love it. So I think starting with like the most basic thing. So going back to what I was saying about my experience where, I went into the, as many people do, a lot of the women who are in the BFP do, we go to our doctor with this idea in mind that infertility, quote unquote, which I hate that word for, I do not like that word, but that's you've been given this diagnosis, right? And that the doctor can fix it. And so we somewhat surrender our own power to this authority, hoping that they will give us the answer and we can go home with our baby and keep living our lives with as little disruption as possible, because just going through that process alone is hugely disruptive and traumatic, for people. So, we just want it fixed. We just want it done. And I think that that's totally valid and to be expected. But what we are missing oftentimes in that picture is that there's this whole other level of things going on, which if we attended to them, we would find that we may not even necessarily need to be quote unquote fixed in the way that we're thinking of it. And so what that means to me is a couple of different things. First, it really begins with learning how to get in touch with yourself. And I know that might sound kind of like, okay, well, what are you talking about there? How do I do that? Right. And so you have to, in my coaching program, what we talk about is that when you're struggling to conceive, you start to develop all of these different narratives in your mind, like related to what I was saying before, like, I'm too old. I waited too long. I've had miscarriages in the past, so my body fails me. I can't trust my body. We wind up telling ourselves these stories. And what happens is, in telling those things to ourselves over and over again, we begin to believe them. And when we begin to believe them, it deeply impacts the actions we're willing to take or that we even think are available to us, given this story that we've made up that we now believe. So when I believed that I was running out of time and that my chances of becoming a mom were incredibly low, I was willing to push my body very hard and spend tens of thousands of dollars in order to make it happen, quote unquote, right? And what I didn't know at the time was that if I stepped back and learned how to quiet those voices, that there was actually another voice deeper down within. And that's the voice that I refer to as your higher self. That's the voice that has a connection to your heart's deepest desire, and it possesses the roadmap to help you get there. But the problem is we live in this world where we're constantly inundated with so much information. It's like that information overwhelm we were talking about at the start of the show, and we're so desperate to become a mom. The women I work with are, because it's so deeply part of our DNA. It's part of what we feel called to do as individuals, right? And so you lose track of that small inner voice that speaks softly, and you start just throwing that spaghetti at the wall, right? And what happens is that leads you further astray. So when we talk about the mind-body connection, we're really talking about learning how to quiet the mind so that you can listen to that softer voice within, the voice of the higher self. And what's really gets me about this is that's sort of the mind part, right? But then when you go into the body part, there's so much research coming out that shows that when we do this practice, and people call it a lot of different things, Harvard's Mind Body Institute came out with this study that showed that women who do mind body programs increase their conception rates by 50%. 50 freaking percent. Right. Wow. And this was a study they did of women. I won't go into the study, but you can Google it actually if you want to. And I can give you the citation if you want it. So this study, they called this one of the things they did in this study was they initiated something called the relaxation response. And the relaxation response, right, is really basic things that we can do with our breath to calm our bodies and our minds. And they found that when we did that, our hormonal systems, our reproductive system actually starts to re-regulate itself. So we leave that state of fight or flight or elevated stress that so many of us live in the modern world, and that is even more commonly found among women when we're struggling to conceive, because that fear drives the elevated stress levels. The elevated stress levels drive an imbalance within our hormonal system, which helps to regulate the reproductive system and actually starts to shut down the production of essential hormones like DHEA, estrogen, progesterone, all kinds of things that we need, right, to build healthy eggs and to have a healthy reproductive system. So when we're talking about the mind body, it's like, oh my God, like this stuff is so connected, and it's like, I lived it and I've seen so many women live it. And then I love it when I can find the data and the research that's like, oh yeah, this is true. Like we can observe it, not just in you saying, I feel better, I feel more positive, I'm living better, I'm happier, I feel clear and confident in my decision making, which I would say are all the things that are going to make you a magnet for your baby. But then at the same time, we see that shift being reflected in the physical body as well.
Yes. And isn't that so true? Because whenever you hear this mind body term, a lot of people think, oh, it's a bit woo, it's sort of
Totally.
like we're going down the spiritual path here. But no, because one of the things I like to try and explain to people that are kind of a bit skeptical is,
Sure.
in a science way, if you think about, when a big drug company has a new pharmaceutical, and before they put it to market, they've got to do a lot of testing. And they always divide the people into three groups: those who receive the drug, those who do not receive the drug, and then there's a third group that get a placebo. So they think they're taking the drug, but they're not. And what these studies show time and time and time again is the people who take the placebo, they get better. They always improve their symptoms. And they took nothing. They took a sugar pill or whatever it is. How can you explain that other than the power of your mind? Because it is your mind saying, I am taking a pill and I'm getting better, but you're not. So if your mind is that powerful, why can't we train it to heal other aspects of our body and our life? And I love that you explain the the actual physiological responses that our body has to some of these practices, because yes, they are essential for reproduction. And I'm sure you see it all the time, clients that used to have a really normal, healthy cycle, and then 12 months into trying to conceive, their cycle is all over the place. And that's because of cortisol and adrenaline and all these hormones that are messing up the reproductive systems that we so dearly need. So I guess it makes me so excited that you can put the data on paper and show people, and it just gives you this sense of, oh yeah, there is something that I can do. So
Exactly.
yeah.
It's really amazing, because, and I love that you use the term like, woo woo or skeptical, because it's true. Like when we first start hearing these terms, it sounds like this really like, abstract thing. It's like, okay, that might be good for other people, but it's not really good for me. But like you said, when we can start to look at the studies and see that there's real truth here, beyond just sort of anecdotal stories of like what happened. There's actual rigorous studies that are showing these findings. And, to speak to one of the things that what you were just saying about, the power of the placebo it's a little off the topic of fertility, but I talk about this a lot in like the very first module of the Badass Fertility program. I go through a lot of scientific studies because I want the women in the program to allow their skeptical side to come out and to use it in order to filter through the information and be like, holy moly, like there's real meat to this. There are like studies upon studies upon studies that show mind body interventions have an impact on fertility. Women who join support groups are 50% more likely to conceive just by getting in the group, talking, getting feedback. I mean, there's so much that happens in terms of, again, that mind body connection. I mean, we could go on and on about why it's effective. And I'm sure we could speculate all day, but the data shows it is. right? And so I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Dispenza.
Yes.
Dr. Joe Dispenza. Okay. So he does a lot of studies too, not on fertility, but on the power of the mind to impact the body. And one of the ones that I often will talk about is there was a study, and I don't remember, it was a major research university. I can't remember which one it was off the top of my head, but the basic study went like this. They had like 15 participants and they wrapped their wrists in casts. Okay. So they could not move. Let's say it was the left hand. I don't remember what hand it was. Say it was the left hand. They wrapped their left hand in casts, couldn't move their hand for, I don't remember the exact number, but I want to say it was like 10 or 12 weeks. Okay. Couldn't move the hand, but they were asked to do a mental exercise of flexing the muscle, like in their minds, however long it was, 15, 20 minutes a day, every day for the duration of the study. When they took the cast off, the mentally flexed muscles had gained muscle mass by about 10 to 15% over like the muscle mass in the hand that they were actually using. So they were using the mind to build the muscle in the body. Right. And that's not to say like, oh, you don't need to exercise. Just think about exercising. Right. Like, I'm not suggesting that. Right. So don't go there. But what it does is it does demonstrate that there's a link, right? That we can use the mind to leverage the power of the body, the healing power of the body. And that in and of itself is so valuable for fertility.
Isn't that fascinating?
I
And
know.
you realize it's just mind-boggling how powerful the mind is. Do you find
Yeah.
that, some of these beliefs and these sort of mindset issues that we have, is it the chicken or the egg? Like, do we bring it to the table
Mm.
before we're trying to conceive? Do you think these values and these beliefs that we've gained throughout our life that then affect our fertility journey? Or do you think it is, we're excited, we start trying, and then 6, 12 months later, we're having trouble, and then we develop all. So how do you think it really works here?
Oh my gosh. That is such a good question. That's like the $1,000,000 question, right? Like, and I think that again, it's like, it's so layered because on the one hand, you could say like, and I mean, I've seen women on both sides of it, right? Like I've worked with women who said, I never expected to have this problem. This was never on my radar. I thought as soon as I got off birth control or as soon as I started trying to conceive, I would be a mom. Right. So and then they go through whatever path, whatever long journey they go through to their babies.
Mm,
And then on the other end of it, there are women who say, I've always had painful periods. I always felt like something was off in my body. My cycles were never really regular. And so I'm not surprised that I'm struggling to conceive. So when it comes to like the mind body, like I would never say like, well, you thought negatively about it throughout your life. So therefore, that's why you're struggling. Because I think sometimes when we're talking about mind body stuff and the impact of our thoughts on our experiences, people sometimes mistakenly assume that they should be blaming themselves or that that's somehow blaming them for not being positive enough. Right.
mm,
Like if I'd only thought differently about becoming pregnant, I wouldn't be struggling. And you have to be really careful because it's just not that simple. And on top of that, there's a lot of experiences that for some women are like almost subconscious at this point. Maybe they've gone into and been stored in their bodies, emotional experiences, trauma that they've had at different points in their lives that again, we're finding more and more can affect one's ability to conceive.
mm,
So it really depends on like where you want to go with this, because I know that, one of the things that we'll do in the BFP is we get into the inner critic. And the inner critic is that voice that says, again, you're too old, you waited too long, you're running out of time. But the inner critic doesn't just start at that level. The inner critic is really connected to like roots of childhood experiences that go back to some sort of formative experience. It doesn't have to be some like deep trauma. It could just be, you dropped your pencil on the ground and someone stepped on it and didn't care. Right. And then like after that point in time, you like never, trusted people with your things or whatever. I mean, I'm kind of exaggerating something to make a point, but it comes from the inner critic, those voices in our head come from experiences in the past. And so you could also say that when we're struggling to conceive, on some levels, it's a manifestation of some unfinished business elsewhere in our lives. I'm not saying that's true for everybody. And I'm not saying you even necessarily have to dig it up in order to get pregnant. But if we're asking about which came first, the chicken or the egg, it all goes together. Because you could also say, like, maybe somebody who didn't feel like they received enough love or attention from their parents. And then one of the coping mechanisms they had as a kid was eating Hostess cupcakes or eating sugar or developing a diet that in some way created inflammation in their body. And maybe they're healthy on the surface, but years later, when they go to conceive, there's a few things going on, right? There's the physical response to the action that was driven by an emotional experience. And if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my God, how am I supposed to solve this? I just want my baby, right? I feel you. You are not alone. I would feel the exact same way if I was you and I was you. And I know from that experience and from the women I've worked with and seen successfully become pregnant, it doesn't have to be that complicated. Resolving these blocks can be a very straightforward and empowering experience. It does not have to be this big, drawn out, dramatic thing. So just trust that. Okay.
It's hard to trust, isn't it? I think that's
Oh my God.
possibly the hardest thing. And you mentioned earlier in one of the things you were saying about this block of being a perfectionist and really letting that get in the way. And that was 1,000% me. And I still, have these tendencies, but I'm able to catch myself in them a little bit more these days. But how do we overcome this? And perfectionism is just sort of one example of many different kind of ways in which we make our lives more difficult. So it feels very all doom and gloom. How do we actually go about unraveling some of this stuff?
Well, the first thing I want to say is be really kind and loving to yourself. That is where you start. Because when we're being perfectionistic, and I definitely fall into that category, type A, hyper controlling, perfectionistic, want everything to be perfect, think if it's not perfect that I'm somehow failing. What's driving that a lot of the time inside of ourselves is again, that inner critic. It's that negative chatter. And so the first step is really to start to say, you know what? I'm going to be a little kinder to myself. I'm going to notice when I'm just stressing out or getting, hyper controlling about myself and the things I must do in order to succeed on this journey, and just be kinder, which can feel really scary because to a perfectionist, it's like, well, then am I sabotaging my chances? Like if I'm just kinder to myself because I, messed up, does that mean that I'm going to keep messing up? And the answer to that, I would say, is absolutely not. In fact, the more we develop that practice of kindness to ourselves, the more we start to relax into the version of ourselves that can handle it without having to be so self-disciplinary and so punitive in a way.
Isn't that such a good point? And this idea of being kind to yourself, it sounds so like obvious. Well, of course I'm kind to myself.
Right.
If you actually start to catch yourself, all of the crap you say all day long, it's very scary. And who else would you speak to like that? You would never speak to someone like that. You'd be horrified if someone else spoke to you like that. So why do we do it to ourselves? And I think you're right. That is just the hardest. It's like it's simple, but it's not easy.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so funny, like a case in point. So I just started the most recent Badass Fertility program, and it's a group of women, and we meet every other week. And in one of our first meetings, they're introducing themselves, they're talking about their stories, how, what inspired them to do this work. And somebody commented, I can look around this group and I can say with complete confidence, you're all going to have your babies. And I really believe it. I really do. But I cannot say the same thing to myself. When I say it to myself, I don't believe it. And there was this resonance among all of the women in the group because they all felt the same way. Like that I can look at you and I can give you a grace and a confidence and a belief in you that I cannot give myself. And that is something that we have learned. Really, it's a learned behavior. It's a habit, and which is a good thing because that means that with attention, we can shift it. I did my coaching training with Marianne Williamson, and she always said that working your mind, it's a muscle, just like any other muscle in the body. And with discipline and attention and regular practice, you can change it.
Yeah, just like everything else. And I feel like it's a good analogy, putting the mind through a workout the way you would put your body through a workout at the gym. You wouldn't go once and just assume, cool, I'm done. I've done my exercise for my life. I've got my six pack now. I'm good to go. It's the same with your mind. I mean, it takes consistency and it's cumulative. The more we do it, the easier it becomes and the more that we see results. And it just, but again, simple but not easy.
It's simple but not easy. But also, I think that it doesn't, like, I'm thinking about the gym. And if you go to the gym, you kind of know, like, all right, the first day I go, I'm not going to see any like physical changes in my body. Like, I'm not going to suddenly have the muscles that I really want. I know that I have to put in the time. And I know that if I put in that time, I'll get there. But something that, I think in our culture, we're not really accustomed to thinking about the mind in the same way. So we start to try to be kinder to ourselves, or we start to try to practice, the relaxation response, which is really just focused breathing for 5 minutes. And we're like, well, it didn't work. I tried it once. My mind was just racing all over the place. I just don't think it's for me, and it's such a misconception because we have this expectation that somehow like everything's supposed to change so fast. And if it doesn't, it's not working. And really, I would be like, oh, that's an inner critic trying to keep you stuck, right? Instead of believing in yourself to make those changes. So I really think with the right motivation, which anybody listening to this podcast definitely has, and the right guidance, you can grow in leaps and bounds with relatively little time and a moderate amount of effort. I really, really do believe that because I've seen it happen. And, it's so powerful.
Completely agree. And it is that idea of being supported by someone else or other people around you that makes all the difference. Because we're humans, we're not meant to, biologically deal with things alone. We are hardwired for connection. And I think that's something we forget on this journey. It's lonely, it's isolating. We think we're the only one going through it. And so it's such a good point to make. Thank you.
Exactly. I'm so glad you pointed that out. Yeah, because it's true. Like, again, women that, because I know I'm talking a lot about the BFP, but it's like there's so much connections. And so many people have said, like, this is the first time I've ever talked about this. Like I've been struggling to conceive for years and I've never actually talked about it this openly before. And just that experience of unloading is so powerful. And it really brings back a lot of that stuff we were talking about in the beginning with like the mind body, so it's not just a luxury. It's really a foundation for success for so many women.
Thank you for sharing that. I completely agree. Kathryn, I could talk to you for hours.
I know.
There's
I love
so
talking to you too.
much that you are just incredibly knowledgeable about. You have just a really, what's the word? You have just a really positive energy, but a really welcoming energy as well. And for those who don't know that you have a podcast as well, can you tell us a bit more about that and any other ways that people can connect with you?
Absolutely. Yes. I am the host of the Badass Fertility podcast. And it's a weekly show where we talk a lot about the things that you and I have been discussing. And really, it's designed to bring out like that high vibe inspiration, down to earth information, and authentic support for women who are on the journey to their babies. So that is a great way if you want to learn more about what I offer to tune into that Badass Fertility podcast. And I run a women's group coaching program called the Badass Fertility Program, or the BFP. And you can find out information about that on my Instagram at Badass Fertility, or go to my website, badassfertility.com.
Amazing. Thank you. And I will link all of those in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
Before we finish up, Kathryn, is there any final words, or anyone who's listening to this who is struggling, anything that you want them to know that they can take with them on their journey?
Yes. If you are listening to this podcast and you made it to the end of this podcast, there is something deep within you that desires to be a mom. And that desire is not random. It's not a mistake. It's meant for you. And there's nothing special about women who have defied the odds and become pregnant despite what they've been told was possible. There is nothing special about them other than the fact that they learned how to do it for themselves. They learned the right way for them. And if you follow your heart, you will find it too.
An amazing message. Thank you so much for sharing that, Kathryn. I
You're
look forward to
welcome.
connecting again with you soon. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening right to the end of this episode. I just love this conversation with Kathryn. She has such an energetic and like infectious energy about her. And I just love everything that she suggests, you know, these little changes that you can start implementing to make such a difference. So if you found this episode helpful, then please share it with someone or leave a review. I always love to hear your feedback and your comments about the show. Now, next week on the podcast, I am speaking to one of my favorite people who works in the fertility space, and that is the wonderful Sarah Holland. Now, you may have heard of Sarah. She runs a business called Fertile Mindset, and she is an expert in EFT, or tapping. And this is an amazing technique that I used when I was struggling to conceive for a really long time. And she's going to explain what tapping is and how it can help you if you are also trying to conceive. So can't wait to have you back for that episode next week. So until then, sending you all my wishes as you continue your own journey to fertility. The most common thing I hear from students who are on their fertility journey is that the stress of trying to conceive has taken over their life. Your days end up being filled with endless appointments, navigating pregnancy announcements. You're trying to eat right, take all your supplements, and it is all you think about from the moment you wake up. I designed the Element Fertility Yoga course to support your body, your mind, and your mental health in 3 important ways: to synchronize your hormones, increase circulation and blood flow, and to help regulate your nervous system. But on top of this, the greatest gift that you can give yourself throughout this journey is a sense of peace, to help you calm your mind and just make this process feel easier. Every single one of my students tell me that this is the first thing they notice after starting a yoga, meditation, and breathwork practice. But on top of this, you have the amazing benefit of actually supporting and increasing your fertility. Studies have shown that those participating in mind-body programs as they're trying to conceive have success rates 3 times greater than those who don't. The course I've designed walks you through natural conception as well as fertility treatments and IVF cycles. And the best part is you can work through it at your own pace in the comfort of your home. The practices start from just 10 minutes per day. To learn more, visit elementpilatesyoga.com or see the link in the show notes.